Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Rittenhouse, Director of NJIT's new major, Theater Arts and Technology, and will be moderating today's Technology and Society Forum. This afternoon, we welcome Dr. Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, author of No Fear, A Whistleblower's Triumph Over Corruption and Retaliation at the Environmental Protection Agency. Dr. Coleman-Adebayo held the position of Senior Policy Analyst in the Office of the Administrator at the U.S. EPA for many years. On August 18, 2000, she won an historic lawsuit against the EPA on the basis of race, sex, and color discrimination based upon a hostile work environment. She subsequently testified before a congressional panel about her experience while working for the EPA. As a result, the notification of Federal Employees Anti-Discrimination and Retaliation Act, No Fear Act, was introduced by Congressman F. James Sensenbrenner, Republican, Wisconsin, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat, Texas, and Senator John Warner, Republican, Virginia. President George W. Bush signed the No Fear Act, the first civil rights and whistleblower protection law of the 21st century, into law on May 15, 2002. As a result, thousands of federal workers and their families have directly benefited from this law. In 2003, Good Housekeeping magazine selected her as the Woman of the Year. The National Whistleblowers Center has characterized her as one of the most influential truth tellers in the country. In June 2007, she was introduced and inducted into the Hall of Fame by the Project on Government Oversight. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference recognized her leadership in the civil rights movement and its 50th anniversary gala in Atlanta, Georgia. Time magazine compared her to civil rights hero Rosa Parks, and she is called the mother of the first Civil Rights Act of the 21st century. Dr. Coleman-Adebayo received her BA degree from Barnard College, Columbia University, and her doctorate degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She has held various academic positions as adjunct professor at Georgetown University, School of Foreign Studies, and visiting scholar in the Department of African American Studies at George Mason University. Before I present our guest, we will show a short film on the research she has done in South Africa.
New use in the renewable energy field that is getting investors' attention, with Discover magazine calling vanadium the element that could change the world.
The drive for renewable energy has created a rush for development of efficient energy storage devices, a new generation of batteries, essentially. My next guest company produces a key element for one type of battery, the metal vanadium.
And what's very enticing is also the possibility that we'll see vanadium used in green technologies for the storage of solar power and wind power.
And it's a company that provides multi-megawatt energy storage solutions using, and I have no idea what this is, vanadium redox fuel cells. That's one of the coolest things I've ever said out loud.
My husband's Simon B.S. Gore-Mbeki. I started while
that you get sick.
nala ka mafatla le maoto le mala. Then ka babolela ka baraka re la itse ke letsatsi la mmala ke ya le tla
I told
fitla.
them that one day that will be
So 35 sa December mna mogolo a roba.
December.
Ne ba the end ya monaka.
That was end of my husband.
The problem with me at Vametco was that they used to burn the vanadium to fuse it. So when working there, you could see suspended vanadium particles in the air, which we used to inhale. There's a certain chemical, they call it MVO. The MVO can penetrate the skin, like the old man said. After washing, when you wear your clothes and you start sweating, the sweat would come out with the black powder. And when you come at home, you look at your clothes, you could see the blackness of that powder.
Did you have any bleeding?
Yes, sometimes when I went to the toilet to urinate, sometimes the urine would come, it is red.
I was a machine operator. There was a machine that they called Krolik machine, taking samples down there at the mine. Yeah, and I started realizing that my tongue used to change during the night.
Like green?
Yeah, my tongue used to change. I couldn't breathe during the night. My feet used to burn like fire. And I start complaining when times goes by that I'm not well, so I'd start giving sick notes and so on.
Right.
They called me to the meeting. They said, look, the company couldn't afford you because you can't do the job properly. And they dismissed me in 1990. I didn't know, because when I get to Vametco, I was just healthy. I was just fine. Took me to X-ray, everything, I was healthy.
So you saw your friends and neighbors dying. Did you believe that they were dying because they worked at Vametco?
Yeah, when I think about it, good luck on Nagam Queen. I want to visit the gay. The American Gassiveri, Saga Fella goes for Fella.
The job I cannot job anymore now because I've got no power, I've got no strength, and all what I'm waiting is death.
I was an EPA employee that discovered that a community in South Africa had been poisoned by a U.S. multinational corporation. And when I reported it, literally the ceiling fell down on my head. My supervisors told me to shut up and not to talk about it. I know that it takes a lot of courage to come out and to talk about your experiences. We also have a lot of repression in the United States, and when you speak out, the state also oftentimes will punish you for speaking out.
Marsha Coleman-Adebayo has been a senior analyst at the EPA for 10 years, and she claims it has been a decade of discrimination.
I was an intruder in their world. I could participate in high-level staff meetings, I was told, only because my colleagues regarded me as an honorary white man. And I must admit, I was so stunned. I remember hearing the laughter from around the table.
She and other employees took their case to Congress and took on EPA Chief Carol Browner.
Perhaps people behaved poorly, perhaps they had ulterior motives. It's the political season.
Browner told us she was unaware of any complaints.
We've more than doubled the number of minorities in our top ranks.
What difference does it make if you bring 2 million of us to this agency and we're all living in hell?
Today I join with the City of Gaithersburg in honoring one person, Dr. Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, a leader in the struggle for civil rights and worker protection.
While these attacks were meant to break my spirit, I decided instead to wage a struggle for human dignity and integrity.
Dr. Coleman-Adebayo won a historic lawsuit in the year 2000 against a federal agency based on racial, sexual discrimination, and a hostile work environment.
My name is Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, and I thank God for this day.
As a result of this victory and her subsequent testimony before the United States Congress, the Notification of Federal Employees Anti-Discrimination and Retaliation Act, also known as the No Fear Act, was passed by Congress and signed into law. After passage of this important legislation, Dr. Coleman-Adebayo formed the No Fear Coalition, a group of civil rights and whistleblower organizations dedicated to working for increased legislative protections for those federal employees who speak out to protect the public good.
Marsha eventually won her court case. It sounds a lot like the Aaron Brockovich movie, and actually, Marsha's story could also make it to the big screen. Actor Danny Glover is reportedly preparing a movie based on her story.
I've got to know Marsha because we're working on a film on her courageous fight for justice. It was a victory for not only Marsha, but it was a victory for women, all human beings who stand up for justice, who stand up and say no, who stand up and be counted.
Waves crashing all around me, stormy waters trying to drown me. Take me under, far away from my home. No refuge as far as I can see. Can't swim to safety. I'm afloat on the unknown, and I'm no longer blind. I can see just fine. I know where I'm going and what I have to do. Even though it's like poison, they will never silence me, 'cause I have no fear as long as the truth is here. Even though it's like poison, they will never silence me, 'cause I have no fear as long as the truth is here.
The spring renewal of the Occupy movement is being launched at the Environmental Protection Agency, which has a sordid record of discrimination and retaliation against whistleblowers, and also policies that harm the poor and communities of color. It's a record that led Congress to pass the No Fear Act. The events are extensively documented by Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, who spearheaded the struggle in her book, No Fear. Over the past months, it's been impressive and heartening to see how people from all walks of life have joined the Occupy movement to engage in the struggle to free the country from corporate domination, the government repression, and its subordination to private power. We should not stand idly by in the face of this assault on basic values and rights, and the renewed Occupy movement provides a framework to resist and to overcome, working in our own communities and beyond. We are the 99%. We have the chance to take power back and rescue the country and the planet from a grim fate.
When dreams crumble into dust and nameless ones do what they must, even if it means dying to live, yeah. One voice raised in protest, ooh, can only lay to rest greed and lies and deception Find your strength within. Fight on and on, give in.
I would like to introduce our very honored guest, Dr. Marsha Coleman-Adebayo. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. In fact, I spent a delightful 2 days with faculty members here and friends, and so thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm here to talk to you and to share with you my experiences as a whistleblower that led to the passage of the No Fear Act, the Notification of Federal Employees Anti-Discrimination and Retaliation Act of 2002. But before I do that, I'd like to first thank Dr. Ravi, who is the chairman of the physics department, for inviting me. He actually saw me on a television show and decided that he wanted me to come here and share my experience with you. So I'm so grateful to him, and we've had a delightful 2 days. So thank you so much, Dr. Ravi. And I'd also like to thank Professor Michelle Rittenhouse, who's director of the Arts, Theater, and Technology Division, who's working with me on a project now so that we can actually have more exposure, reach more people about what's happening in South Africa. So thank you very much, and thank all of you for coming today. I've actually come here to ask for your help. I've spent the last 10 years of my life fighting for a community in South Africa that I will discuss today. And I hope, and really I pray, that at the end of my discussion that I will somehow inspire you to join me in this struggle. For example, perhaps we could organize a conference on human health effects of vanadium pentoxide, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. Whistleblowers have played a very prominent role in the news lately with the arrest and upcoming trial of Private Bradley Manning. I was actually with Private Bradley Manning. I was at his trial a couple weeks ago. He allegedly released video showing the murder of Iraqi civilians by the U.S. military. And also Julian Assange for allegedly publishing information received from Private Bradley Manning in WikiLeaks. And Assange is currently, as you probably know, holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK. And also John Carrico, who we're actually organizing a send-off for him on Thursday. He's the former CIA officer that exposed waterboarding as a part of the routine interrogation process in Iraq and Afghanistan. By the way, he exposed the fact that the U.S. routinely used torture in its interrogation process, but he never participated in torture itself. Yet he has received a 30-month prison sentence, which he will start in a couple of weeks. And the list goes on and on and on. So a number of engineers, physicists, and environmental scientists, such as yourselves, could properly ask, why should you care about protecting whistleblowers? Well, I have a very personal story that I'd like to share with you today about the importance of scientists having the courage to blow the whistle. Astronaut Dr. Ronald McNair was a very good friend of mine. We both attended MIT and we were in Cambridge at the same time. Ron, in fact, was my husband's karate instructor. And my husband, Segun Adebayo, also received his PhD from MIT in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And we all attended the same church together, St. Paul's AME Church. In fact, I remember the Sunday that our pastor announced that Ron had been selected as an astronaut. It was a day, I can tell you, of great joy and pride for all of us. And I know that Ron looked forward to his career as an astronaut, not only for the excitement of exploring new frontiers in space, but he recognized that he was also breaking down historic barriers that would lead to an expansion of opportunities for future generations. In fact, Ron sent Shagun and me a lovely postcard a couple of weeks before he boarded the Space Shuttle Challenger. He wrote that he was looking forward very much to this flight. So our family, like so many others around the globe, watched in complete horror on January 28, 1986, as the Space Shuttle Challenger disintegrated before the eyes of the world. As you must be aware, and I quote, the Rogers Commission found that it was NASA's organizational culture and decision-making processes that had been a key contributing factor to the accident. NASA managers had known about a potentially catastrophic flaw in the O-ring since 1977, but failed to address it properly. They also disregarded warnings from engineers about the dangers of launching posed by the low temperatures of that morning, and had failed to adequately report these technical concerns to their supervisor, unquote. The scientists at NASA should have known better. As you are aware, professional engineers are supposed to subscribe to a code of ethics as proposed by the National Society of Professional Engineers. And I quote, "Engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall hold paramount the safety, welfare, and health of the public." So what would Ron say today about the importance of whistleblowing? And what would he say about the need to have a culture among scientists that encourage openness and exchange of information? So I'm here today to encourage NJIT to provide leadership in this area by encouraging both students and faculty to commit to standards where safety, health, and the welfare of the public is not compromised by fear and intimidation. So let me start out by reading a small passage from my book, No Fear. And it sort of sums up in many ways the story. They, meaning the people of South Africa, the miners in South Africa, came to me complaining of green tongues. They told me about bleeding from every orifice. Their husbands could no longer perform. The sheet on his side of the bed would be black in the morning from whatever it was that oozed from his pores while he tried to sleep. Some had only photographs of their husbands who had died at the age of 50, but had looked like 95. There were reports of many dead and more dying. The company would not help. It was an American company. The company would not even let them see their own x-rays. So they had come to me. For them, I was America. I worked for the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and America has sent me to them in joy and celebration at the end of apartheid. America had come to help them and to help their new government succeed. We can hardly imagine a world without whistleblowers and their contribution. We needed Dr. King to blow the whistle on the atrocities occurring in the South. And we needed Jeffrey Wigard to expose the fact that tobacco companies intentionally manipulated the level of nicotine in cigarettes. And we needed Alicia Dabney to blow the whistle. And many of you are thinking, well, I've heard of Dr. King, and I think I've heard of Jeffrey Wigard, but Alicia Dabney, Who is she? Well, Alicia just received the No Fear Institute Whistle Award, and she works for the United States Department of Agriculture. On a fire assignment in Texas, Alicia writes, quote, "My supervisor spit directly in my face in front of everyone on the assignment, and all witnessed it, and I reported it. The same supervisor put me in a chokehold and slammed me down, trying to sexually assault me. I begged and cried for him to stop and not do this to me. When he released me, I ran and reported it to upper management," end quote. When upper management refused to listen to Alicia and to protect her from her manager, she contacted the No Fear Institute, and we were moved by her story. She requested that we post the phone conversation by her supervisor, demanding that she come to his hotel room, and we've complied with her request. And you can listen to this call, although I'll tell you it is very graphic, on my website at www.marshacoleman-adebayo.com. Click on the Women Whistle tab at the top of my website. But I'll come back to Alicia a little later. But we have role models of defiance and advocacy like Alicia to admire. And I thought as a part of Black History Month, I'd like just you to listen to another woman who stood up and spoke truth to power. And that woman is Rosa Parks. She is now, because her archive is now located at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, and they're beginning to release her papers. And she talks about what it was like, and many of you will experience this as you go into the work world, of being sexually harassed. And so it's important for you to know how other women have dealt with this issue. It's important also for you to know that this happened to Rosa Parks in the 1950s when the Klan was very much a part of the government. And so she knew that her actions might, in fact, cause her death or the death of her family. But this is how she dealt with her situation. Parks writes, "He offered me a drink of whiskey, which I promptly and vehemently refused. He moved nearer to me and put his hand on my waist. I was very frightened by now. He liked me. He didn't want me to be lonely. And would I be sweet to him? He had money to give me for accepting his attentions," she wrote. But what did she say? She said, "I was ready to die. But give my consent? Never, never, never," unquote. You see, every whistleblower has a trigger. It's the deep place in your spirit where you say never. It's the point where your principles meet your conscience. Now, don't you love Rosa Parks now more than you did 5 minutes ago? You see, at some point we will all have, or we have had, the experience of someone in authority telling us to do something that we know is wrong. But how many of us have the courage of a Rosa Parks to say, when confronted with the loss of a job, never, never, never? Everyone has a Rosa Parks moment. And my Rosa Parks, my trigger moment, came at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I joined the EPA in 1990 as a senior policy analyst after working at the United Nations here in New York and the World Wildlife Fund, and had various stints as professors in the Washington, D.C. area. And one of the things that I would find out about working in the federal government is that it was a culture that was held together by an intricate web of fear. Fear of retaliation, fear of losing your health insurance, fear of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time in front of the wrong person. But the mother of all fear was the fear of losing your job. And it's that kind of fear that prevents good people, not bad people, but good people, from sounding the alarm when they find out that there's lead in the water or mercury in the food or that a football coach is molesting a 10-year-old boy. So we need whistleblowers, and we need laws that protect whistleblowers. So I became the EPA representative to the Environment Committee of the Gore-Mbeki Commission in 1996. And this was a commission that was led by former U.S. Vice President Al Gore and South African Deputy President Thabo Mbeki. And the Gore-Mbeki Commission was designed as a flagship bilateral foreign policy vehicle. In other words, whatever was happening between the United States and South Africa was happening inside the Gore-Mbeki Commission. We were the foreign policy vehicle in which the relationship between South Africa and the United States occurred. And my job was to work with the South Africa Department of the Environment and Tourism to provide humanitarian environmental assistance to the people of South Africa who had been terribly trampled during the white supremacist apartheid era. But not long after I assumed this position, a South African environmental leader named Jacob Ngukani told me about a community about 2 hours from the capital of Pretoria called Brits, where miners were being reportedly injured and dying from exposure to vanadium pentoxide. He described workers who were bleeding from every orifice, workers who defecated and urinated blood. Their tongues turned green, sometimes black. When I reported the situation to my supervisor, a situation that I think anyone would consider horrific, but particularly if you work at the EPA, I was told to stand down. That's a very polite way of saying, shut up. It means don't do anything, just look the other way. My supervisor went on to explain that since I had just moved into a nice corner office, a nice large office, perhaps instead of worrying about every African on the continent, I could use my time to decorate my office. So I had just told an EPA senior manager that who I thought would be as offended as I was about a completely unacceptable situation. And I was told to have a Martha Stewart moment. You see, large-scale U.S. production of South African vanadium started in 1957 when the American-owned Minerals Engineering Company established a mine at Kennedy's Vale. Later, Union Carbide from Danville, Connecticut, established a Union Carbide vanadium mine in Brits, a city about 2 hours from Pretoria. It is this mine that I'm really talking about today and that you saw in my video. Now, the American car industry has particularly benefited from vanadium. Henry Ford recognized the potential of the high strength and lightness of vanadium alloy steels for crankshafts and springs for motor cars. And by World War I, vanadium alloyed steels have become firmly established. Vanadium alloyed steels provide increased hardness and strength at high temperatures, better wear resistance, and improved cutting tool performance. What I was reporting from South Africa could not have come as a surprise to the EPA. By 1977, there was substantial evidence of health risks, even potentially fatal risk associated with vanadium. On my return from South Africa, on one of my independent tours, I might say, in 1998, I researched the subject of vanadium at the EPA library. A report that predated my discovery of the poisoning of vanadium miners by nearly 20 years had already identified the source of green tongue from exposure to vanadium. EPA's Toxic Substances and Disease Registry stated regarding the side effects associated with vanadium, occupational exposure to vanadium, especially vanadium pentoxide, produces mainly irritation of the eyes and the upper respiratory tract, often accompanied by productive cough, wheezing, rales, chest pains, difficulty in breathing, bronchitis, and pneumonia. There have been occurrences of green to black discoloration of the tongue, metallic taste, nausea, and diarrhea. An NIH study confirmed the incidence of bleeding that vanadium victims reported to me: cardiac and vascular disease, inflammation of stomach and intestines, damage to the nervous system, bleeding of livers and kidneys, skin rashes, severe trembling and paralysis, nosebleeds and throat pains, weakness, headaches, and dizziness. Now, we all share the benefits of vanadium byproducts: cars, refrigerators, airplanes, laptops, medical equipment, silverware, jewelry, but only a tiny fraction of South Africans bear the burden of what we enjoy. In fact, 80% of the vanadium that we use in this microphone and the lighting systems come from that small community in Brits, South Africa. EPA, in fact, reported that a probable oral lethal dose for humans is between 5 and 50 milligrams per kilogram, or between 7 drops in 1 teaspoon for a 70 kilogram or 150-pound man. A request by South Africa for EPA to send a team of medical experts to investigate the health effects of vanadium on mine workers was answered by the agency sending a veterinarian. Now, I'm often asked if there are substitutes that can be used for vanadium. And the answer is yes, although imperfect and more expensive. Substitutes include columbium, tungsten, manganese, and titanium. How much does vanadium cost? Well, vanadium pentoxide prices range from $6,000 to $6,400 per pound. However, the average vanadium worker earns about $1.75 per hour, or approximately $3,400 per year. So once I made it clear to my agency that I would not participate in evil by looking the other way while South Africans were being poisoned by a U.S. multinational corporation, my life in the federal government became a living hell. I was the target of death threats, rape threats, racial and sexual name-calling, denial of promotions, you name it, I went through it. It took 5 years of from filing the complaint to actually sitting in front of a jury. But after 2 weeks of hearing the unimaginable violence and hostility that was directed towards me, a jury of my peers declared the EPA guilty of racism, sexism, color discrimination, and pronounced that EPA had subjected me to a hostile work environment. And then after my trial and enormous media coverage, I was called to testify before Congress. So maybe this is a good time, after I've explained what I experienced, to ask all of you to take a personal journey, which is to think about how would you have dealt with this situation. Your students, your faculty, and someone comes to you and they tell you on a case that you're working on that they're experiencing the poisoning of a community. I'd just like for you to take a moment and think, what would you have done? How would you individually have handled this situation? After the trial, members of Congress decided that what they had heard at a congressional hearing was unacceptable, completely unacceptable for behavior in a U.S. agency, and introduced the No Fear Act. So we began to organize for this law, and I organized a group called the No Fear Coalition. And through that process, I discovered that what I was experiencing at the EPA was happening throughout the entire federal government. Different agencies, different situations, but a remarkable pattern of similarity. If you spoke out against corruption, waste, discrimination, the system moved quickly to crush you. So if you want to ask yourself, why didn't the scientists at NASA speak out about the problems with the Space Shuttle's Challenger? It might be for some of these very same reasons. So I'm not going to go into the No Fear Act because you can do your own research and you can find out. But it's a very powerful piece of legislation that essentially educates federal employees about their rights within the federal government and the importance of speaking out, particularly when it comes to public safety. So for 2 years, we marched and we faxed and we wore out shoes on Capitol Hill, and we talked to anyone who would stand still longer than 2 seconds about the corruption and abuse inside the government. And through this whole process, yes, we lost colleagues. Yes, people were fired. Yes, people were stressed out and had all kinds of medical problems. But after 2 years, we passed the law. And we passed it by a unanimous vote in both houses of Congress. And this was the first time that such a progressive law had been passed in both chambers of Congress. And the president signed the law on May 15, 2002. So what did we learn about this process? We learned that people can do whatever they want to do when they are determined and they understand how powerful they are. We didn't have wealthy backers. We didn't have sugar daddies, as we call them in Nigeria. We didn't have commercials. All we had was our conviction that what was going on in the federal government and the impact it was having on just regular people throughout the world had to stop. So I would encourage you to read my book, No Fear, and learn more about my journey, including 2 independent missions that we took to South Africa to carry out the interviews that you saw in the film a few minutes ago. It's been a remarkable journey, but one that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. So I told you I'd come back to Alicia Dabney. And so, since I'm a social scientist, I enjoy conducting experiments. Now, I told you that Alicia was a victim of sexual harassment. And actually, I've told you where you can go, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to it yourself. Go to my website, www.Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, and you can actually hear her supervisor ordering her to come to the hotel room and describing whatever he thinks he's going to do to her. Raise your hand if you think Alicia's supervisor was disciplined, fired, or demoted. One person. Raise your hand if you think Alicia was fired after she blew the whistle on what had happened to her. Thank you. Yes, Alicia was fired May 31st, 2012. So you know a lot about my story. You know that a jury found the EPA and its managers liable for discrimination. You also know that Congress decided to pass a law as a result of my legal case. That law was called No Fear. So raise your hand if you believe that the managers in my case were either disciplined or fired as a result of a court finding of retaliation and discrimination. Okay. Raise your hand if you think I was fired as a result of filing a case of retaliation and discrimination. 2009. So that my termination from the EPA, in fact, let me first go on, let me just say one thing, is that in law there's something called the chilling effect. Have you heard of that before, the chilling effect? And what that means is that the well has been poisoned. It means that people no longer speak out anymore because they've been chilled, they're scared, they're cold, which is what happened at NASA perhaps, right? So it's called the chilling effect, that people are afraid to speak out because they're afraid that what happened to Alicia, what happened to Marsha, could happen to them, so they're chilled. That's a very important point. And what you've demonstrated is that the chilling effect, that you understand something about the chilling effect, even though many of you have not even gotten to the workplace yet. So that's an issue that we have to deal with now. How do we combat the chilling effect? So, you know, my termination from EPA could have been the end of my story. But I and so many other federal employees decided that those in power would not have the last word. So we've continued to fight to make the federal government a model employer. And we've continued to fight for new and improved laws to protect civil rights victims and whistleblowers. I would have preferred to practice the science I learned at MIT, and I would have rather spent my career saving lives and working to protect the environment. But it is my fervent hope and prayer that someone in this room will become passionate about our right to freedom of speech and organize students and faculty to continue this struggle. Vanadium workers need you. They need your research and your commitment. And they need for all of us to demonstrate that we understand the importance of safety, health, and protecting the welfare of the public. So I hope my presence today is the beginning of a relationship between us that will continue, perhaps a conference on health effects of vanadium pentoxide, and fighting for a community, quite frankly, that cannot fight for itself. So there are two words that have echoed throughout human history in the hearts of those who have passionately fought against injustice. I know it's what Ron was thinking when he boarded the Challenger. And it's what Rosa Parks said to her employer when she said never. It's what Dr. King said during his mountaintop speech when he said, "I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man." It's what Felicia said when she said no to her supervisor. And it's what each of us ultimately must say if we are to change a corrupt government, save our families, and more importantly, save this planet. And that is no fear. No fear. Thank you very much.
The floor is open for questions here, and go for it.
Marsha,
yes?
Is Union Carbide still mining vanadium under the same conditions?
You know, what happened after Bhopal? Are you familiar with Bhopal? I assume most of you are familiar with Bhopal. Bhopal is a situation where toxic gases were released from a Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, India, and about 500,000 people were impacted. Tens of thousands of people died. And so after Bhopal, as you probably know, Union Carbide began to break up its various subsidiaries and call them different names. Right. So Union Carbide, now it's called IBM, I think, right? No, it's Dow Chemical now, sorry. So Dow Chemical eventually bought Union Carbide, although the IBM, the Union Carbide building is still in Danbury, Connecticut. In South Africa, the way they dealt with that is that instead of calling the mine the Union Carbide vanadium mine, now it's called Strategic Minerals. And so what Union Carbide did, which is what so many multinationals do, is when they face legal problems, they basically take on a new persona, a new legal name, but it's still the same organization, same board of directors, same managers, and that sort of thing. The conditions remain essentially the same. The U.S. government, I think, was successful in slowing down this process by removing me because I was clearly moving very quickly to try to get some change, to have change take place in this vanadium mine. And by removing me, they slowed that process down. So the conditions remain the same, essentially. Men and women, men and now, quite frankly, women. When I first started doing this research, women did not mine vanadium. But now, because of the situation in South Africa, women are also mining vanadium. And what's really scary is that we have absolutely no data on the impact of vanadium exposure on the reproductive health of women. That's really scary. So now we have women mining vanadium, and they're still providing, this corporation is still providing very few protective gear for these workers. So the men are still using little plastic gloves that you can buy at CVS to mine vanadium, and as you know, uranium and lead is still found in the same area. They do not wear respirators because the mine owners think that respirators are too expensive for their $1.75 per hour workers. And so these men and women are in the field breathing this poison 8 to 10 hours a day with almost no protective gear. I think what has happened, and we have to really count the victories, very small ones, but they're important for us just to keep going, is because of our advocacy. Vanadium workers now have showers so that they can actually shower before they leave the mine. What we had found when we started our research, when we started visiting the home of widows, we found that a lot of the women were also dying from vanadium pentoxide poisoning. And what they didn't know, what the women didn't know, is that when their husbands came home, the vanadium was in their hair, it was on the uniforms they were washing by hand, it was under their fingernails. And so now the mines do provide a place for the men and women to take showers before they go home. And the mines do launder the uniforms now so that the women are no longer, washing their husbands' uniforms. I know this sounds like really small stuff, but it took us years just to get those compromises. So the conditions have changed a little bit, but not enough to really make a major dent. I agree. It's not minuscule, because I got to tell you why. Because what was happening is that the men would come home and they're covered in vanadium dust, and the wives are interacting with their husbands, so they're breathing in this dust. And so they were becoming ill and they were dying. So it's not minuscule. And then on top of it, babies in South Africa, usually children sleep in between moms and dads. So the babies were also inhaling the vanadium dust from their dads. And we found one case where a baby had, died from vanadium pentoxide poisoning. And then the women were washing their husbands' uniforms with their hands. So they were becoming contaminated through that route as well. So what we've done is just to limit the exposure to these households of vanadium pentoxide. It's not a huge thing, but it's toxic with very small amounts. That's right, and they live near the mine. They live near the mine because they can't afford transportation to drive to the mine. So the vanadium the dust covers everything. This is complete and total poisoning. So the dust is on top of the homes. The dust is on top of the chickens, and of course they eat the chickens, and so you get the complete recycling of and then the humans eat the chickens, and so you get the total recycling of the vanadium poisoning. So it's a major problem. I'm sorry? Mm-hmm. Right. It's only in the raw form. It's not in the finished product at all. So you're not exposed to. I'm not being exposed right now because I'm talking through a still microphone. So it's only in the raw form. It's at the point of mining as opposed to production, the final production, I should say. Yes. I can't even begin to describe how inspired I am by the work that you've already done. So thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, can you speak on some of the ideas that maybe are being thought out right now for the future and continue that progress, making changes for them? Well, that's one of the reasons why I come around and I talk to students in particular, because I think you really are the future of solving this problem. And we were talking about today, how does this story end, right? How does this story end? And the story ends, I think, with us developing real substitutes for vanadium so that people do not have to risk their lives to be able to make a living. So we need to retrain the workers from only working in fields that basically are suicide missions to productive work, whether that's in farming or teaching or whatever it is. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is that South Africa is a very rich country, as I'm sure all of you know. 80% of their gross domestic product, GDP, comes from the mining sector: gold, diamonds, vanadium, chromium, you call it. I mean, it's just an incredibly rich. So at some point, even South Africa has to make a decision whether or not they want to continue to base their economy on the extractive industry, or whether they want to move away to something which is healthier, agriculture. And I understand what I'm saying, believe me. I know that agriculture can probably never bring in as much money as gold. But at some point, when do societies begin to say that the health of my population is more important than money? So we need a conversation in this country. So we need to talk about sustainability, because what's happening in South Africa right now with the mining industry is not sustainable. You can't build your whole economy on industries that essentially kill your population. You can't do it. And so we need to have that conversation, and it's a difficult conversation. But that's sort of long-term what we need to think about.
You mentioned last year there was a massacre of workers in South Africa. Could you mention what is the percentage, about the situation of human rights?
Right. Well, I'm sure most of you remember that last year there was a revolt at a chromium mine in South Africa, and 40 to 50 South African workers were murdered. Do you remember those reports on television? And the workers were trying to increase their salary from $1.75 to $2. And the South African police came out and they killed 45 to 50 people. And then they fired all the workers who were involved in the strike. Again, this chilling effect that I talked about earlier. Now, I know that the vanadium workers were also thinking about joining their brothers on the strike, too, and made a decision not to do it, particularly when the South African police came in and they were so brutal. The revolt was so brutally put down. But that, again, is what I'm talking about. When you have multinational corporations that basically control your economy, they get to play the tune. They get to decide how these kinds of situations are going to be negotiated, right? So you have multinational corporations that I'm sure are having conversations with government officials saying, you cannot allow this strike to continue. Because what happens if the strike rolls over to gold workers or to the rubber industry or vanadium or chromium or uranium or lead, which they still mine in South Africa. So the revolt was put down fairly quickly, and these workers were murdered, and now their families are obviously facing very difficult situations. You know, what I can say, and this is sort of a different tangent, I suppose, is what I'm always surprised at is how few people it takes to make change. And I've just told you that we passed a law in Congress, and that we were able to, in a sense, to almost change a small part of the federal government. If you go to any federal government website, I don't care, CIA, FBI, White House, there will be a no fear icon on the front page of that website. You click on it, and it tells you how many people have filed cases of complaints of discrimination, how many whistleblowers have filed complaints of retaliation. And if you ask me, how many of us were active, really active, in the No Fear movement? Not the ones who march, you can get to come out and march, but how many people were really active on a day-to-day basis in terms of getting this law passed? It was 12 people. Now today we have almost 100 people in this room. We should be able to change the world. We should be able to do that. We should be able to make a change in this small 5,000 person community in South Africa. There's no reason why we can't do that. We only have to have the commitment and the passion and desire to make a change. And we can do that. Not only about vanadium, but other issues in this country, whether it's capital punishment, whatever it is, we can make a change. But first, we have to understand how powerful we are. Yes? That really is a great question. I think I've always been concerned about injustice. I think that's always been something that wakes me up in the morning, and it's the last thing I think about when I go to bed at night. And there's so much injustice in the world. You know, I saw my mother fighting for me when I was in school in Detroit, Michigan, and they wanted to put me in special ed. And I saw my mother take on the Detroit public school system. And then I went from special ed to honors program within a couple of hours. I saw, you know, what happened in the South when I was growing up. Courageous people, you know, fighting for dignity and fighting for civil rights. You know, as a mother, I fight every single day for my children to make sure that they have everything they need to succeed. You know, so I think in our own individual ways, we're all fighting for justice. There's something that each of us cares about in this room that you're willing to speak out about. At least I hope so. You know, maybe you need to tap into that. But I almost think that we're born with this thirst for justice. And so for me, I feel so honored that my life, that the journey of my life allowed me to sort of really take on an issue, to dig my teeth into it, and then to really see results from it. And so maybe that's something that we can all work on. If you haven't seen results yet from fighting for a particular issue, just try it and see what it feels like to be successful at fighting for justice. I mean, whether that's a child that you know is having trouble reading, and you help this child learn how to read better, and then the child goes off, like Dr. Ravi was telling me about earlier today, where he took on this one child who was having a lot of problems, and he just dug into this case. And then the child left, I think here in NJIT, and then went to Harvard, went to MIT, and then went to Harvard. I mean, this is a life well spent. And that person will have, and that child will also hopefully go on and help other people. So I think in many ways, it's like when we take on a case, we fight for it. We feel and we taste what it feels like to be victorious. It's like a runner's high. You want it again. You want to feel that again. And I think each of us, we're so, I have a professor, Noam Chomsky, that you heard in this tape. And one of the things that Noam used to always, that he always says to me, is that there is nothing there's no greater high than fighting for justice. That you see, it's so real, it's so tangible. You fight to end the war in Afghanistan, or you fight to end the war in Iraq, and then you hear the president, maybe he's taking all the glory, but you know that you were in that demonstration that forced the president to bring the troops home. So it's those kinds of struggles and victories that really, I think, encourage you to keep going to the next one. At least that's been the experience in my life. Thank you very much. Yeah, I do. One more that's
Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you especially, Dr. Marsha. We really, really, really appreciate you coming and being with us, and I have a feeling that something like this will influence all of us for the rest of our lives and give us an opening when we see one to do something. Thank you.